Do you see expanding this microcosm from Moscow to the full United States?
This is the point where I should have said, blah, ha, ha, ha.
In northern Idaho's dunes of grains and grass, a
We live in a beautiful place.
battle without bullets over the direction of a town.
I believe that what's happening in Moscow is a microcosm of what's happening all across the country that started here maybe 10 or 15 years earlier than what's happening across the country.
And that is?
Well, just the radical division. I don't think our nation has been this divided since 1859. It's divided and it's inflamed. And that whole process, I think, began to be visible here a decade or a decade and a half before it became radically visible in the nation as a whole.
Pastor Doug Wilson leads Christ Church in what he calls a Cold War civil war.
Our rights come to us from God and not from the government.
Fighting in a
As an obscure document called the Declaration of Independence maintained, notice what is taken as extremism, are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. No creator, no rights. If there is no creator above the state, you don't have rights, you just have privileges, and that only for a short time.
all places a college town. Moscow, home to University of Idaho and just 8 miles from Washington State University, exudes a live and let live vibe.
No, it doesn't. I'm sorry. That's the party line. They would the mantra or the marching creed of the progressives here is diversity until we get some.
One of the interesting things about Moscow is how these two entities live side by side, and I mean literally. Right behind me, that's the offices of the Christ Church, and right next door is the headquarters for the local Democratic Party.
And the sidewalk she's standing on is the one that I've been walking on numerous times when I get cussed out or flipped off. 20% of a wave, right?
From this former art house movie theater, Wilson leads his campaign to make Moscow a Christian town.
Idaho is a very red state. Moscow was historically a very blue dot in this red state. And so consequently, the fact that we've done this has been disruptive in the minds of some, but the feasibility of evangelizing in Moscow had to do with the importance of the university and the size of the town.
So in your version of a Christian town, would there be a place for non-believers?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Would there be a place for same-sex couples?
But you mean legally?
Yes.
You mean like marriage?
Mm-hmm.
No marriage. But there'd be same-sex couples.
No marriage, even though it's the law of the land in the United States?
Just like Roe used to be, right?
That clip has understandably gotten some traction, right?
My belief system in our doctrinal stand and what we believe the Bible teaches, homosexuality is not only a choice, but a sinful one, yes.
It is a muscular, masculine-led vision of Christianity.
Scripture tells the man to provide, protect, and love. Scripture tells the woman to honor, help, and submit.
Expounded on his show Man Rampant.
Men are going to be dominant no matter what you do.
And
That was Michael Foster on the left there, a true troublemaker.
articulated in his blogs. This one saying marriage is a little kingdom and the husband is a little king.
A wife should be...
What they've left out here is something I've said over and over, which is that the wife is the crown, as it says in Proverbs. A godly wife, is the crown of her husband.
Should be submissive to her husband, as Paul teaches in multiple places, yes. So a wife should be submissive to her husband. But in the blog post that you just cited, I made a special point of saying that the woman exercises authority over the selection of the one that she's going to submit to.
And you also need to understand that in the expanded answer that we recorded and NBC didn't air, I went on to explain that in Christian theology, submission does not equal inequality. She is taking the common line, common understanding, that if one person submits to another, that telegraphs a fundamental inequality. But we believe that Jesus submitted to the Father, and he was equal with the Father, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but emptied himself, took the form of a servant, and he told all Christians to submit to one another in the same way, in a similar way, in an analogous way. And so we don't take submission as a flag of inferiority at all.
So when you say wives should be submissive to their husbands, does this mean why shouldn't they be equal?
Well, because God created us a certain way. So we want to fit with the design.
Former Mayor Nancy Cheney says the community has endured decades of Wilson's often incendiary ideas.
When
The community has endured decades of putting up with someone who thinks differently than they do. William F. Buckley once said that liberals are committed entirely to tolerating other views and then are astonished to find out that there are other views.
Some kind of outrageous statements were made early on about Southern slavery as it was, as a mutually affectionate relationship between master and slave.
So in a little bit, they're going to show a clip from my controversy library. Anybody has ongoing questions about it should pursue that. But I think that you should keep in mind that I'm not maintaining and never have maintained that slavery as this monolithic entity was characterized as she is describing it. It was a very human institution, meaning that if you read the slave narratives, during the Depression, FDR sent people out to interview former slaves, many of whom were still alive, and they told stories of slavery time. And if you read through the slave narratives, you will discover accounts of horrendous treatment, the kind of thing that Harriet Beecher Stowe would have presented to you. That this is the fiercest abolitionist would have described slavery in that way. There were some horrific examples, horrific patterns of slave abuse. And as we said at the time, as I continue to say now, nobody is going to be successful in getting me to defend the indefensible. The point was that it was not uniformly 100% the way the abolitionists described. There were abuses just as the abolitionists described, and there were mutually affectionate relationships. And if you read the accounts of former slaves, and you read a bunch of them, as I have, you will see both. You're going to see horrific examples, and you're going to see very human relationships where masters and slaves cared a great deal for each other.
Saying that members of our LGBTQ community, trans people, should be exiled or possibly stoned, that catches our attention.
I should say something about that here. Back in the days of the Reconstructionists, there were arguments that said that homosexuals needed to be stoned. If we were going to implement Old Testament law, that it was necessary for homosexuals to be executed. And the comments she's referring to were part of my answer to that, where I said, no, even in the Old Testament, King Asa and King Jehoshaphat exiled homosexuals, not executing them. So what I was demonstrating was that the Bible does not have a minimum penalty of execution for homosexuality. In other words, they did some cherry picking of incendiary words and didn't follow the argument.
Our attention.
Wilson says he was misunderstood.
This is a webpage on my blog called My Controversy Library. If you've ever had the misfortune of Googling my name, all sorts of things almost certainly came up, and you can find an answer to just about all of them here, Controversy Library.
Rebutting the many controversies on his website, writing he does not believe in the death penalty for homosexual acts or that slavery was a positive good.
Let me commend NBC here for pointing that out. It's very clear that they do not comprehend what we're going on about, what we stand for. It's very clear that they don't get it, and that's particularly in evidence in the panel discussion that Ann Thompson is part of afterwards. But they really did give us airtime, and they really did let both sides speak, and they really did publicize my denial of some of the fundamental slanders. That's a good thing.
But the visible and invisible lines being drawn here and elsewhere across the country are setting off alarm bells for many faith leaders.
Do you consider Christ Church a church?
I don't.
Said the Unitarian
Really?
I really don't.
What is it then?
I see it as a dominionist cult.
Reverend Dr. Elizabeth Stevens leads the Unitarian Universalist Church of the Palouse.
They deny the deity of Christ. She's a woman pastor. She's about to appeal to the Bible.
In the public square, I don't see them representing Christianity. I don't see them representing the values that I find in the Bible.
Christianity is Trinitarian, not Unitarian. Should I go over that again?
I see them representing patriarchy.
Like, what does she think the Apostle Paul was? Does she represent Pauline theology? Does she embrace and celebrate the Pauline take on male headship and submission?
I see them fighting the culture war.
Stevens' position in that war is visible for all to see, a stained glass rainbow chalice.
They better take that out. Otherwise, they might be seen as fighting the culture war, which is apparently a bad thing.
Wilson fights with the printed word. A prolific author, he's written dozens of books, all distributed by his own Canon Press.
I write books to make the little voices in my head go away. So far, it's not working.
It publishes more than 1,000 different titles, half of which are books and materials serving hundreds of thousands of homeschool and Christian students nationwide. Wilson laughs off the cult accusation, but the former Navy man embraces culture warrior.
You can't have a naval warfare without ships, and you can't have tank warfare without tanks. And as I tell Christians all around the country, you can't have culture war unless you have a culture. Our tagline is all of Christ for all of life. So we want to be 7-day-a-week, 24-hour Christians in everything we do, and a distinctively Christian culture is forming here, and not reclusive and not cultic, but it's distinct.
Here in Moscow, Wilson and Christ Church have built a multi-million-dollar enterprise that includes a K-12 school, a publishing house, a college, and a streaming show. Pursuits that some worry will change the very character of this town.
What scares me is that he is making Moscow into a Wilson town.
Keely Emmer.
No, this is not about, it's not all of Wilson for all of life. It's all of Christ for all of life. Our message is the gospel. Man is sinful and rebellious and is descending into demented depths, and only Christ can get us out of it. Nothing to do with Wilson. As Whitefield once said, let the name of Whitefield perish. And I would echo the same. Let the name of Wilson perish. I don't care. Charles de Gaulle once said that graveyards are full of indispensable men. And I think that applies to me as much as to anybody. And that's not the case with Christ, because the graveyard he was put in, he didn't stay there.
Green Mix is a former pastor.
There we go again. Another pastor, a lady pastor, rebuking me for the inattention with which I'm apparently reading my Bible.
What worries me is not that the stamp of Christ might be wrongly shoved down the throats of my neighbors here in Moscow, but that the stamp in the foot of Doug Wilson will be wrongly and is being wrongly crammed down their throats or standing on their neck. I think that his...
Standing on their neck, crammed down their throats. We have not... We're not proposing any laws. We're not boycotting anything. We are the ones being boycotted. We are the ones being attacked. We are the ones being harassed. It's not this is a textbook case of what happens throughout history. persecutors always feel themselves to be persecuted. That's why they feel justified in what they do.
His influence on this town has been despicable.
Aubrey and Wyatt Knickerbocker met 2 years after her family moved to Moscow, seeking a Christian town.
We found what at first we thought was a very welcoming community. There was something every day, something new, some sort of baby shower or something for the school. You get very swept up in all of it.
Until they heard this message from another pastor in the church.
Women should wear women's clothes. They shouldn't wear pants.
Shouldn't have short hair.
Shouldn't have short hair. Men shouldn't wear earrings. No one should have tattoos.
And then there was this.
A photo of a bunch of our women wearing slacks. Thank you, Mr. Editing Team, whatever.
A psalm sing in the middle of the pandemic, protesting the local mask mandate, retweeted by then President Trump.
That was when I realized that these were not people trying to spread awareness or trying to spread the good news of Christ. It was people trying to say, look at us, we are so oppressed.
Did you feel betrayed when you realized that?
How dare we think that somebody's being oppressed when 3 of our people were arrested at a perfectly legal psalm sing? Notice this. They're feeling oppressed when they're on the side of the people hauling people off, making other people do things. We weren't making anybody do anything. We weren't making anybody wear a mask. We weren't making anybody not go to events. No, we're a tolerant bunch.
How would you describe your feelings?
Yes, very betrayed, because I've grown up in the Christian church, and it never occurred to me that a church could be wrong and how wrong they could be.
Yeah, they might have a woman pastor, for example.
They stopped attending Christ Church. Aubrey says she was attacked online. Now they actively avoid patronizing businesses run by church members.
Notice who's boycotting whom, who's attacking whom.
If it was another church that owned it and they just happened to have some beliefs that I didn't agree with, that's fine. But when you're hurting people, that's when you have really crossed many lines.
Are you being judged on your faith rather than your product?
I believe 100% that that's true.
Josh Flickner says he came to Moscow seeking a Christian community and found it in Christ Church. But his business, Journey's End Cafe, is paying the price for where he worships.
I really wanted this place to be actually a bridge builder in the community. And so, yeah, it's really a bummer that that a lot of people in the community are just so full of bigotry that they do not want to even try to build those bridges.
He says his workers are threatened by crank calls and his future by a social media campaign calling out businesses run by church members.
Look at what people say about my business and then pretend like I was not a white heterosexual Christian male. That would be a hate crime. Anywhere else in the country, against any other type of person, that would be a hate crime.
And that is exactly correct. I've watched this whole thing with Journey's End unfold, and what Josh was attempting to do there really was an attempt to create a space where believers and non-believers could get together and have a good time. And he really was not he. What he's saying here is the real deal. And the intoleristas, as I call them, weren't having any, so they shut him down.
3 weeks after this interview, Flickner announced he's closing the cafe.
So how close is Wilson to reaching his goal of turning Moscow into a Christian town? Well, no one is quite sure, but everyone has an opinion.
Honestly, it's almost laughable, only because you're talking about a minute percentage of the population.
So George here is maintaining that NBC is overreacting. It's a big bunch of nothing. Sure, go on thinking that. I encourage that line of thought.
George Scandalos and Brandy Sullivan own restaurants and businesses on Main Street.
As someone who was served on the city council, I haven't seen any traction gained in that area. The last 2 elections, there were some candidates who were members of Christ Church, and those elections were very uneven, and
I would call it a landslide.
there you go.
In defeat.
Yeah, except that there was no one from our church running for city council in the last election. Other than that, the thesis holds. And, never mind.
Yes.
You have 700 active households, about 2,000 church attendees. This is a city of 25,000 people. Is the way to reach your goal to bring in more people or to convert the hearts and minds of those who already live here?
It would be both. Yeah, we would want to persuade the people who are already here, and we want to welcome the people who arrive here.
The people who are arriving here in droves are people who are being chased out of their previous homes, previous places of residence by blue state governors, and people who are exhibiting the same fierce intolerance that we're dealing with here in Moscow, and by people who are feeling wronged. The persecutors are feeling wronged.
Like many other churches, Wilson's deals with accusations of sex abuse, including a deacon this summer pleading guilty to a federal charge of child pornography, and Wilson marrying a released child molester to a church member.
I think it would be good if we inserted here a clip from the full interview, our recording, where I talk about how a lot of people don't understand what pastors do.
When someone has sinned grievously, which that individual had, and was busted in large part because of my work as a pastor, which many people don't understand what pastors do. Because of that, and it was years later, and he was repentant, and the woman involved knew, exactly what was entailed. I did it, and I'd do it again. So
you would marry a convicted child molester to one of your parishioners.
Yeah, do you think it should be against the law for convicted child molesters to get married?
It's not. The question is to you. Do you think that's appropriate?
I don't think it should be against the law for someone who has been guilty of a sexual offense like that to marry. I don't think that ought to be prohibited. The thing that upsets people is not the child molestation offense, because there are 20, 30 sex offenders in Moscow, and everybody knows the name of one of them because of where he goes to church. Right? The ones who don't go to church, they're all okay. They stay out of the newspapers. But the one who is repentant and wants to live right and is, straightened out, we're going to go after him because this is because the target is actually me.
Wilson, if anything, seems energized by the criticism and attention.
It is my superpower.
And undeterred from his goal.
Do you see expanding this microcosm from Moscow to the full United States?
It's hard.
This is the point where I should have said "blah ha ha ha," but I didn't think of it.
It's hard to envision how that might happen. I think it would be wonderful if it did. So if there were a reformation and a revival, that's something we pray for regularly. And if what is happening here caught fire and spread elsewhere, I would be very, very grateful.
So I'd like to reiterate what I have said in other places. I was very grateful to the Meet the Press crew because I think they did labor to give both sides a fair shot at speaking their piece. There was this is a 15-minute segment, and both sides were having their say, so that's like 7 or 8 minutes for us, and there was a good hour of videotape where we were able to explain things in more detail. Some of the truncation is just the nature of this medium. Some of it has to do with their worldview that prevented them from grasping or getting a hold of what it was we were maintaining. But just boil it all down. We are in a small town very liberal town, historically liberal town, and it still is a liberal town. But it's a liberal town that is being confronted with a solid core of conservative evangelical Christians. And this solid core of thousands of evangelical Christians in a very liberal, tolerant town is pressure testing the vibe, the live and let live vibe that's supposed to be going on here. It's putting it under stress, putting it under pressure. And many of the liberals are not responding in a liberal way at all. So thanks for watching our content. We really appreciate it. I want to take a second to talk about my book, Angels in the Architecture, and how you can listen to the audio version for just 99 cents, which, if you round up, is a whole $1. The modern view of the world is empty and lifeless, nothing more than a bunch of matter in motion, with life by the thousandth, millionth chance emerging from chaos. The modern world, as a result, can only conceive of progress as more efficiency, more technology, more domination, greatly improved matter in motion. By way of contrast, the Christian faith presents a glorious vision for culture and a vision of the world in which truth, beauty, and goodness are built into the very molecules of the universe. Angels in the Architecture, which I wrote together with Doug Jones, the book covers such diverse topics as creeds, poetry, history, the church, feasting, and storytelling. And here comes my best imitation of a salesman. The audiobook is now available at mycanonplus.com. If you haven't joined Canon Plus yet, what's wrong with you? Oh, yeah, excuse me. You can get your first month for just 99 cents by using promo code DOUG99, DOUG99, all caps. My name is in there not as an ego thing. We're just trying to help you remember it.